Okay, so welcome back. Today we're going to look at some ways that you can monitor the performance of your computer hardware, your CPU, your motherboard, the temperatures, the GPU, like you see here, graphics processing unit. You can measure the temperature, how much load it's under, and we're going to look at some free software that's out there that you can use to do the monitoring. And we're going to look at the pros and cons of that software. And ultimately, we're going to develop what you see here, which is a very, very simple C# Visual Studio Windows Forms application. You can use whatever software you want, but this is just one example. You can see here it is giving us a chart of a couple of parameters that I measured for my GPU, my graphics processing unit, while it was performing a 3D render. And you can see down here, it's here's the time. It went from 7:23 to 7:30, so it's about a 7-minute render. And you can see in orange, the GPU load was up to near 100%. You can see the scale here in orange, and the maximum was 98% load, so it went almost to maximum. And the response of the GPU temperature, you can see here in blue with the left axis, started out in the 50s and it exponentially increased with the full load. Over about 7 minutes, it got up to a maximum of about 82 degrees centigrade. So a really nice way to better understand how your hardware is performing and some interactions between different aspects of your hardware performance. What we're going to do is we're going to look at some options that you can use if you just want some free software. And we're going to look at what are the pros and cons of those. What are the aspects you say, oh, I wish that was a little bit different. And we're going to see we can make our own software that kind of deals with those very easily. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus on a piece of software for monitoring your GPU, as you see here. So if you've done any GPU performance monitoring, you're probably familiar with this piece of software, which is called TechPowerUp GPU-Z. And it's a nice application. It allows you to monitor a whole lot of information about your GPU. And you can see down here, if you have multiple GPUs, you can select the GPU. I've got two, a GTX 1080 Ti and an RTX 2070 Super NVIDIA. And it gives you a lot of information about the memory and the BIOS and the drivers and all that. But it also allows you to monitor in real time by clicking on the sensors. Things such as GPU temperature, you see here, fan speed, GPU load, and you can modify this and you can look at a whole bunch of stuff. So you can see here we're at like 32 degrees centigrade with 23%. Both fans are 23%. There's no load on the GPU. And over here on the right is what are some like graphs that as this increases, you'll see more red here. And it's kind of like a chart, a real-time scrolling chart. However, in my view, it's of really little use. I mean, it doesn't really give you a good indication. It's very tiny and it doesn't really help you understand very well what's going on, which is why we're going to look at another piece of software that will help us with that issue. Now, one thing that it does provide is you see down here, there is a checkbox called Log to File. And what that does is it generates a file with real-time data. So what you can do is you can say, okay, I want to measure these 4 variables, the temperature, the fan speed, and the load. Or I can go and I can add or subtract some of these things. The way I do that is I go to this hamburger icon with the settings, and you can see there's some general settings. And if I go over here to sensors, here are all the sensors that are available in this particular GPU. And it's got 20 or so different sensors that I can select. I've got GPU temperature, fan speed, GPU load. But what I can do is I can add as many as I want here. And what it will do is it will save those in real time. It will measure those and save them to file. And it does it sensor refresh rate it defaults to 1 second. So it's going to save a file every 1 second with a reading from whatever sensors you have determined you want. So how do we do it? Well, you click this log to file And it gives you an open file dialog where you can select the location that you want to save this and the name of the file. We'll say save, and once you click save, it is now logging to file those 4 bits of data in real time, and it's doing it every second. As you uncheck it, it will stop. So now we've stopped. Let's take a look at that file and see what it says. So here is the file that we just saved. And as you can see, it's really simple file. It's a CSV file. And it's got a header, and it's got a date time on the left, and then it's got the 1, 2, 3, 4 things that we were measuring every second. It's got GPU temperature, fan speed of one fan speed of another fan, and then the GPU load in percent. So you can start to think, hey, I can grab this data and I can develop my own charts. And that's exactly what is done by another piece of software I want to show you. And that is this software called Generic Log Viewer. And this is a piece of software that has been around since, I think, 2013. And we're in 2023 now. It's 10 years old. And somebody who has decided it was interesting to develop their own software has, over the last 10 years, every few years there might be a little update, but it's basically developed by somebody. It's not open source. It's just you can download it and run it, and it's for free. And what it does is it takes that CSV file and it charts it. And it's got some good things. It's got a lot of good things. But it's got some things that, you know, if you're like most users, you're going to say, hey, I wish it had this, or I wish it had that. The problem is it's up to whether the developer has any interest or time in what you want modified, and you can't really count on that. And that's why I think it's really important, like I've mentioned many times in these videos in this channel, if you know how to write software, or even if you don't, it's a really good idea to kind of avoid free software and open source software, and wherever possible, do it yourself. And there's many reasons for that. Like we mentioned, if you want a modification, you have to hope that the developer has time and interest to spend on doing the modification, the upgrade. If it's open source software, you know, usually it's very poorly documented. It may have some errors because it's people who are generally hobbyists who have spare time, and they have no obligation to do things correctly. They just do whatever they feel is fun. It's nice that they make it available, but they have no obligation to make anything correct. I have some things that I wish it did. So what I did is I said, hey, wait a minute. If this is just a simple CSV file that's being generated by GPU-Z, all this application is doing is it's grabbing and parsing and charting that CSV file. We can do that, and we can make it however we want. We can modify it. It took me only a couple days to develop this, which does about the same as this generic log viewer, but it has some features that I find a lot more useful. So what we're going to do is we're going to show you how to develop this simple application in C# Visual Studio's Windows Forms and modify it however you want to give you what you feel is necessary. So now let's take a quick look at some of the design aspects of this application. Again, it's very simple. We've talked about many aspects of this in previous videos. You can imagine there's going to be charting. There's going to be a lot of charting going on. Again, we're going to open a CSV file. We're going to press this open file, and it's going to give us the open file dialog, and we're going to select one of the output files from GPU-Z. Again, it's a simple CSV file, so we're going to have to know how to do open file dialog, and we're going to especially have to know about how to parse that CSV file to get the data we need. So there's going to be a lot of charting, a lot of parsing of CSV file, and one of the features or limitations of this is we're going to be able to chart at the most 4 sets of values. Here we've got 2. We're measuring in blue the GPU temperature over time, and also the GPU load, but we can also measure up to 4 of these, and it will automatically populate these. As you can see in this version that's running with a different file, and it's automatically populated 4 different parameters that it's charting, and it's showing us the 4 different values. So now we're going to have the chart, we're going to have the different values that it's charting. We're also going to have these check boxes that allow us to, for example, deselect this percent load, and all it's going to show is the GPU temperature in degrees C with this left-hand y-axis, or we can reselect the GPU percent load, and now the second y-axis comes up. We can deselect the GPU temperature, and now all it's showing is the right-hand y-axis with the GPU temperatures. So a nice feature that you can plot different values, percent and also degrees centigrade, on one chart with different scales. So really nice way to look at 2 different types of values simultaneously. So we're going to have charting, parsing, and also the abilities to select and deselect the different charts. Now you may say, well, I would like to be able to not only chart one file, but also simultaneously chart another file. And that's true, that's a good feature. What we can do is we can write a bunch of code in this application to open another file and chart it. Or what we can do is use our heads and say, hey, wait a minute, why don't I just run another instance of this application, and we will get a completely new window like you see here with a new chart, and we can have a second file. This is a different file, and we can chart that and we can compare them. Now if you also want to be able to do it on the same form, then you can do that. Now also we're going to have to be able to resize this and have everything stretch and be anchored. We have a video talking about anchors and resizing forms. I encourage you to look at that. We're also, as usual, we're going to have a feedback here that tell us what are the traces that we opened up, how many traces. Here it's 2. And we're going to print out the name of the trace that we opened up, and also what's the date. We're going to grab the date. The CSV file is going to look like this. We're going to have to parse it. We're going to have a header. We're going to have to extract some of this data, and then we're going to use the date time in the first column. The other choice is maybe we just assume we know that it's done every second and just ignore these and just use, every second is the interval and just generate our own times. In our case, we're going to extract the hours, minutes, and seconds and then chart those. As you can see here, we've got hours, minutes, and seconds. So we're going to use that as the x-axis values. But that's about it. Not a lot to design. Again, we're going to have to do a lot of charting and a lot of parsing of the CSV. So now that we've got a good idea on how we're going to design this and put this all together, again, I encourage you to look at previous videos. I have a 3-part series on C# charts that explain the basics. You really need to understand that. And also we've got videos on parsing CSV. In the next video, we're going to actually look at the code and see how we can put it all together to make this work. So if you like any of these videos, I encourage you to hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell notifications, but most of all, please let others know that we're here so we get some views. Really appreciate it. Otherwise, take care. Have a really good day. Thanks.